as a continuation of the subject on the newly imposed American sanctions on Russia, how they will affect the Russian economy and their war effort, as well as possible risk of secondary sanctions on countries dealing with Russia. We are joined by our next guest, Sergei Erofeev, sociologist from the Rutgers University in New Jersey. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hello, Claudia. Hi, Don.
Right before we start, I would like to take a moment to introduce the former Polish Prime Minister Jan Krzysztof Bielecki and a soundbite coming from him on the new U.S. sanctions covering Chinese companies cooperating with Russia.
Democratic Europe and democratic West is definitely a good example where the functioning institutions are improving the quality of market, and Europe, in fact, is about single market. Single market supported by the institutions is still very attractive. Of course, a single market and democratic Europe must these days compete against the countries which believe that free market and riot police is the best solution. That also the Chinese try to convince that the model where actually democracy is traded for prosperity is possible. But I strongly believe that it's not possible and it's not sustainable. So in a longer term, China will go flat, and hopefully there will be a change of the model.
So, having listened to former Polish Prime Minister Jan Krzysztof Bielecki, what do you think about this set of sanctions, and how are they actually going to affect Russia and possibly China as well?
You know, sanctions is not only a political and economic tool, it's also a social and cultural process. And when we talk about sanctions in very, very heightened terms, like they will tomorrow just dethrone Putin, or when we say that sanctions don't work and it's all useless, this says a lot about our social psychology. But there is also the social psychological thing about those who impose sanctions. I mean, policy makers in the West. It's also a process which is not very fast. The first reaction of the democratic West in supporting Ukraine and helping it fight Putin was that we should unite, that we should do everything for the Ukrainian refugees, and let's think about some sanctions. Some sanctions were introduced immediately. Some very important measures like banning all Russian fossil fuels to Europe happened much later, because that's how the bureaucracy works in Europe. But that very, very first reaction was very emotional, and it was a moral one. But with time, reason and calculation enter the stage, and the things become, on the one hand, slow, on the other hand, much more thought through. So what is happening now is a slow maturing of the Western policies in the area of imposing further sanctions on Russia. They are not going to be a silver bullet. By now, everybody in the West understands that. But what is very important is to enforce those sanctions which have been already introduced. Look carefully how Putin's system is trying to circumvent them, and to do as much as possible to persuade China to stay away from helping Putin too much. So that's the social and cultural process of adaptation and trying further uncharted waters, because the Western world hasn't been in this situation before. What we have in the past with Iran in particular hasn't been on that scale. And there hasn't been that type of threat to the Western democratic world order from Iran. It's only now from Russia. So that's the principle which we should understand when we look at how sanctions develop and how one can react to that. But we should also remember that China is the most important counter-agent in this process for the Western world and America in particular, because China has its own interests in this protracted war in Russia. They will not want to see Mr. Putin fall. That's also what the cultural analysis would suggest, not just an economic political analysis, but analysis of what is the system of Chinese rule now, what kind of cultural system is there in connection with international politics and economy. So China, on the one hand, doesn't want Mr. Putin to fall. On the other hand, they will try to avoid serious complications in trade dealings with the West. So the sanctions will work. And now the threat of secondary sanction is something that China should be really wary of. And Putin may really start worrying more about his.
They should be. It all boils down to a question of enforcement and just how serious it is for the United States and other Western partners to actually follow through with any threats to the Chinese economy. But it's interesting you mentioned Iran, because Iran had sanctions on them for a very long time, and they were very, very heavy sanctions. Yet they were lifted just in the blink of an eye, and for no really serious reason. Now, the question here is, can Vladimir Putin withstand even tougher sanctions for an extended period of time? Or is it that time frame that will be his undoing?
Well, time matters, of course, Don. And I think that the further we go, the more difficult it will be for Mr. Putin to sustain his economy and pay his army and keep the lower classes, so to speak, happy in Russia. So the thing is, I think, that China may decide not to supply Russia with arms, but they have the potential of serious financial help to Putin and to the Russian army in indirect ways. So if Russia wants at some point to be rescued by China, then we'll immediately start new negotiations, and we will see that. We will see, judging from Putin's and Kremlin's behavior, what and how much they want from China. But at the moment, what we see is the further strengthening of the Western position towards the Kremlin. And
unfortunately, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but unfortunately our time came to an end. I hope that we will have an opportunity to speak more on these sanctions as they unravel, and we will see the actual results. So thank you so much, Sergei Erofeev, sociologist from Rutgers University, New Jersey, for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.